In the 1930s, archaeologists returned to Iraq to find out. In 1931, a team of archaeologists led by Leonard Woolley and his wife Catherine were excavating the ruins of the ancient Mesopotamian city of Ur. The Woolleys were a colorful husband and wife team, friends of Lawrence of Arabia and of Agatha Christie, the novelist. They left a detailed record of their finds, revealing that they dug 5,000 to 6,000 years into the past, the right time frame for the Noah story. One day, his workmen struck an unusual layer of soil, one that could only have been deposited by water. When the soil was analyzed, it showed that the silt had been deposited by river water. Now, Mesopotamia suffered regular seasonal floods, but this was a massive layer, something out of the ordinary. In fact, later archaeological excavations of ancient city streets show that 5,000 years ago, at least 3 Mesopotamian towns were hit by large river floods. So Leonard Woolley and his wife had hit the jackpot. There had been a massive flood in ancient Mesopotamia after all. It was conclusive proof a real story lay behind the biblical and Babylonian epics. In committing the story to writing, the Sumerian scribes may have embellished it with myths and supernatural events. But there are plenty of practical details too, and they are priceless in reconstructing a story that's historically plausible. However, it does mean starting afresh. It means setting aside the storybook image of the huge Ark, the global deluge, the number of animals, and the landing on Mount Ararat. Above all, it means abandoning the familiar biblical image of Noah and introducing a very different image of what he might have actually looked like and how he might have lived. Archaeological finds have established that the Noah story may actually have happened in Sumeria, an ancient civilization in what is now Iraq. The Babylonian accounts say that the story begins in the city of Shuruppak. This was the cradle of civilization. The Sumerians invented writing, the wheel, and accounting. And what is known of Sumerian culture offers the first glimpse of the historical figure behind the flood stories. The most obvious difference is how Noah looked. Forget the man in biblical robes and imagine instead a Sumerian from head to toe, wearing eye makeup with a bald head and even a kilt. Then there's what he did for a living. The Epic of Gilgamesh says the Sumerian Noah owned silver and gold. 5,000 years ago, these were the currency of wealthy merchants, suggesting that the Sumerian Noah was not a farmer or a wine grower, but a businessman. Instead of an ark to survive the flood, the Sumerian Noah is more likely to have built a boat to make money, hauling grain, beer, and animals. All the big trading centers, like the great city of Ur, lay on the Euphrates. It was cheaper to take cargo on river barges than by overland caravans. The question is, how big a barge did this Noah have? The Sumerians used a variety of boats on the Euphrates, from small reed canoes to wooden ones 20 feet long. But the Babylonian sources agree the flood boat was much bigger than those. There was an obvious incentive for merchants to build the biggest commercial river barge possible. But they would have been limited by the technology available. No remains or inscriptions of large Sumerian boats have been found yet. So instead, marine archaeologists have asked how big a boat could the Sumerians have built with the available know-how. One simple solution would have been to tie smaller boats together.
Hold it a bit!
Marine archaeologist Tom Vosmer believes there are clues to this effect in the Epic of Gilgamesh. It says that the boat was divided in sections.
Probably one of the best ways to do it would be to build it in units, such as the size of this, and use it as a pontoon in a river barge, actually. And hold a number of these together, lash them together with some rope and heavy timbers, and then they could build the ark on top of that. And it was probably a system that could have been used on the rivers quite easily.
Since the historical ark was a cargo vessel, it's easy to say what the Sumerian Noah loaded onto his barge. Forget the animals marching 2 by 2, and think instead of Noah loading animals, grain, and beer for sale. Even for a rich merchant, it's quite an undertaking to mastermind such a big construction. But according to the Babylonian sources, Noah had more than just wealth on his side. They say Noah was the king of the city of Shuruppak, but he wasn't above the law. Failure to deliver his cargo would have meant social and financial ruin for Noah, whether he was king or not. In Sumeria, anyone who failed to pay their debts, including kings, was liable to end up as a slave. But how did the flood come into it? The most likely answer is that Noah was caught out by a freak combination of natural events.
Keep it coming, keep it
Parts
coming.
of the Euphrates were only navigable when river levels were at their peak. That meant Noah would have had to time his departure carefully. That meant waiting for the meltwaters. Melting snow from the Armenian mountains increased the flow of the Euphrates in July. Records indicate that only then were the river channels deep enough for large vessels. But there was a risk. If Shuruppak was hit by a freak storm just at the moment that river levels were at their highest, then the peaceful waters of the Euphrates could turn into a raging flood. But the average rainfall in dry years in July was 0. The odds on a catastrophic river flood in Mesopotamia would have been remote, about 1 in every 1,000 years. So if it happened, it should have been worth writing about. The Babylonian tablets say that on the day of the flood, Noah and his family were having a banquet on the barge. Then the weather suddenly began to change for the worse. A freak storm was beginning, and a catastrophic flood was on its way. A storm that would threaten Noah's very survival.